Hey everyone, it's Mr. Drake once again. We are going to continue on with the political history primarily of Rome. We've already talked about the Roman Republic and how Rome was ruled by the Senate and consuls. And today we're going to talk about how Rome transitioned into being an empire ruled by an emperor. Now, here are a few things that should guide you in the watching of this video. These are the things I want you to think about as you watch. I want you to analyze why Rome changed over from being a republic to being an empire. You should, by the end of this video, be able to summarize why Julius Caesar was important, both his reign and his death, and be able to explain why the Pax Romana, or Roman peace, was such a prosperous time. So as you watch, keep those things in mind. And by the end of the video, you should be able to go back and do these three things here. Now, the most important thing, first and foremost, is to understand why the Roman Republic fell apart and led to the Roman Empire. Here are some of the causes. First of all, the Senate, you may remember from the video on the Roman Republic, had to give up some of their power to the tribunes, the lower classes, the plebeians, and they weren't too thrilled about that. And you begin to have this disagreement in Rome over who should have the power. Should it be the Senate, these patricians, that group of 300 people who had previously pretty much ruled absolutely, or should it be these more reform-minded people who want to give more rights to the lower classes? So you have this fundamental disagreement there. There are also slave revolts that are going to serve to weaken the government and cause it to spend a lot of money to suppress those rebellions. The most famous slave revolts were led by a slave named Spartacus, who you may have heard of before. The picture there is of him actually being killed, finally, by Roman soldiers. Speaking of Roman soldiers, one strange phenomenon in Rome at this time is that the soldiers were not loyal necessarily to Rome itself or to the Roman government. They were loyal to the generals that they served. So if there were two generals that did not get along, you might actually see a fight or a civil war between Roman soldiers loyal to this general and Roman soldiers loyal to that general. So all of those things are going to serve to make the Republic's government weaker and leave it open to being changed. Now, as the Roman Republic becomes weaker and weaker, the person who sort of begins to fill that power vacuum is Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar was a general in the Roman army. He is most famous earlier in his life for taking over Gaul, which is the ancient name for France. There was one other particularly powerful general in Rome at the time named Pompey. And Pompey and Caesar earlier in their lives had been friends. But over time, Pompey began to worry that Julius Caesar was starting to eclipse him a little bit and beginning to assemble a little too much power as he took over all these areas throughout Western Europe. So Pompey ends up more or less bribing the Senate into making Caesar disband the army and come back to Rome. But Julius Caesar said, no thanks. I think, in fact, I will just take over Rome for myself. So Julius Caesar takes his army, comes from France, from Gaul, back into Italy, and crushes all of his opponents. Anyone who tries to stand up to him, including Pompey, was pretty much just crushed. And in 49 BC, at the age of 51, Julius Caesar becomes the dictator of Rome. The Senate stayed in place. They still technically had some authority, but pretty much Julius Caesar was the absolute ruler of Rome at this time. When Caesar took over, he was technically a consul, which you might remember from the Roman Republic video is someone who sort of oversaw the running of the army and was sort of the leader of the Senate. But unlike other consuls, there was no other consul besides Julius Caesar. There were usually two, but in this case, he was the only one. So, again, as a result, he's pretty much a dictator. He does have some accomplishments during his short reign. He only was in charge for about 5 years. He established some public works to get people jobs. There was the building of roads, for example. Rome, very famous for its system of very good paved roads at that time. You may have heard the saying before, all roads lead to Rome. And part of that saying is based on the fact that Rome had so many great roads that reached all over the territory they controlled. He made sure citizenship was extended to more people throughout the land they controlled, and he also reformed the Roman calendar. He thought the Egyptians were better at things like astronomy, and they had better systems for determining dates and all of that. And so he created a new calendar for Rome, which was called the Julian calendar, and that's, with a few changes, the calendar that we still use today. Now, his enemies were afraid that he was absorbing too much power and that he was essentially going to become a king. And the Senate wanted to keep the Republic in place because that meant they had more power. So on March the 15th, 44 BC, a date known historically as the Ides of March, Julius Caesar was killed in the Senate by a group of Roman senators led by a man named Marcus Brutus. When Caesar dies, you have, again, this struggle for power. Octavian, who was a relative of Caesar, and Mark Antony. Mark Antony, you may have heard of him before as being one of the lovers of Cleopatra. He was also a Roman general, and again, he had a very important ally in this struggle with Cleopatra and all the resources Egypt had. Interesting side note, Julius Caesar and Cleopatra also had a little thing going on, and there are stories that Julius Caesar actually fathered a child with Cleopatra, the Egyptian leader. Anyway, in this battle between Octavian and Mark Antony, Octavian wins. He is referred to from there on as Augustus, and he is considered to be the first Roman emperor. So it's at this time that the Roman Republic is dead and the Roman Empire is born. Now, as the Roman Empire dawns, you see some pretty good things put in place in the government. For example, a postal service, so it's easier for people to communicate. More public works projects like roads, and the postal service is more efficiently run because of the roads, because it's easier to travel around and carry correspondence. One very famous example of a Roman road is the Appian Way, and you see a contemporary, modern-day picture of the Appian Way there. There are still remnants of the Appian Way all over Italy and the former Roman Empire. There's civil service reform put in place. That's where you have to apply to get government jobs and actually be qualified instead of just being given a job because you're rich or know someone important. You may remember we talked about that during the China unit, that a lot of Chinese dynasties had that in place. They also instituted a census, which is a count of the people in the government, so they know how many people lived in certain areas and where to send money and send soldiers and send services. The United States has a census every 10 years for the same reason. Now, as for the emperors themselves, some were good, some were bad. The interesting thing about Rome is that they didn't believe in rule being passed down from father to son when the emperor died. So every time an emperor passed away or was killed, you would have this struggle for power. Caligula is an example of a bad emperor. He was not very powerful, not incredibly bright, probably insane. He, according to legend, appointed a horse to the Roman Senate, his favorite horse, because, well, who really knows why? He was actually the first Roman emperor assassinated. He was killed at the age of 28 because no one could stand him. There were some other bad emperors as well. Nero persecuted Christians. Christianity is a new religion at this time. Really was sort of born in the Roman Empire, and we'll talk about that more as the unit goes on. But Nero was notorious for killing large amounts of Christians. But there are also examples of good emperors, and we'll talk about some of what they did. Between 96 and 180, a period of not quite 100 years, there was a string of emperors that are referred to generally as the 5 good emperors of Rome. It was peaceful, the government ran efficiently, there was prosperity, and things were generally good. It was during that time that Rome reached its peak in terms of the amount of land that it controlled, and that peak happened in the year 117, and that's the map you see there. So they controlled almost all of southern and western Europe, part of the island of Great Britain, all the way over through Asia Minor, ancient Mesopotamia, and well down into Egypt and northern Africa, you can see there. So they controlled the entire Mediterranean Sea rim. And the Romans referred to the Mediterranean Sea as Mare Nostrum, which is Latin for our sea. So that just shows you how much control they saw themselves as having over this area. There's also a period of about 200 years during the good emperors and after that's referred to as the Pax Romana, which literally translates from Latin as the Roman peace. During this time, there's virtually no war. Things are very prosperous. People are well educated. They had taken over the area that was known as Greece, and they had inherited a lot of the Greek ideas on philosophy and education. So things are very, very developed in that regard. And there's also a lot of entertainment, gladiatorial contests, circuses, festivals, parties, all that kind of stuff. And those entertainment things sort of hid the fact that there was some turmoil. There were a lot of people in Rome who were very rich and had it good. Then there were also a lot of people who were pretty poor and were not happy. And the Roman government would sort of please those people and make them happy by giving them entertainment and giving them food. It was an unofficial policy known as bread and circuses. If you give the people food and keep them entertained, they won't rise up and rebel against the government. And that worked for a while, but as we'll talk about towards the end of this unit, it didn't work forever, and eventually Rome is going to suffer for it. Now again, what's coming up next, we will be talking about the rise of Christianity and how important it was to Roman history, and also why Rome fell apart. Make sure you're taking good notes on these videos. Make sure you're keeping up with all of your assignments on Moodle, and as always, ask your teacher if you have any questions. Cheers!